Dad always used to say the only causes worth fighting for were the lost causes.
The Senator yield. No, sir, I will not yield.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
You're listening to a Pyrolitical Pyrocast.
Hi, and welcome to the Pyrocast presented by Pyrolitical.com. I'm Thomas.
And I'm Randall, and we're in studio together tonight.
This is rare. We haven't done this since like 2011, so we're excited to be together. We don't know what'll happen. The show might blow up. It could be too much awesomeness, but
it is possible.
Maybe not. We'll see. But we do appreciate you tuning in because we have got a great show on tap for you tonight. Randall, why don't you tell them what's going on?
Well, there's tons of stuff going on. We're going to talk a little bit about Steve Bannon. We're going to talk a little bit about press freedom. This is World Press Freedom Day, so we're going to talk about freedom of the press, and among other things. That'll get us rolling anyway.
Well, very nice. Hey, before we get into it, just want to remind you to go over to YouTube and click subscribe on Pyrolitical Live. That's where we put these broadcasts. And there's a whole slew of Pyrocasts and other material there that you can go subscribe so you get our notifications in your inbox saying something awesome's in your box.
Perfect. Do it now. Don't wait. Go there. YouTube, Pyrolitical Live.
Absolutely. So, Randall, you talked about press freedom, world press freedom.
Yeah, there's lots of articles talking about the freedom of the press today because it is World Press Freedom Day. And so one of the articles that I found in the Washington Post talked about the fact that Taiwan has moved up 6 spots as they rank the freedom of the press in different countries. It's moved up 6 spots, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's any better than it was last year.
It's an interesting conundrum. Like, we as independent broadcasters, we don't have to worry about, getting paid much, but we also don't have to worry about sponsors and corporate influencing us. So we can say whatever we want. And when you get into the mainstream media, so-called, there's all of these advertisers and sponsors, and then there's the powers that be. And I've heard that all of our media companies are owned by, there's only 6 companies that own all media in America. Although there are millions of broadcasters like us who are talking about the truth. So when you get mixed in with all of those professional, all of those powers that be, it's hard to stay independent. And as important as that right is, as defined by the Constitution, there's just not a lot of independence anymore.
Well, you let the cat out of the bag too early.
I did?
Yeah, that's where we're going. Anyway, so basically what they're talking about...
Now. Yeah, we're going there right now.
What they were talking about in this article was the fact that so Taiwan moved up, but that was a reflection not necessarily of Taiwan liberalizing and becoming more free in the way they view the press, but because the ability of other countries has diminished. And they talk about all sorts of different countries across the globe and how sad that is. But that's the big elephant in the room, is we're talking about all these countries and how freedom of the press isn't that great. But if freedom of the press is as important a topic, if freedom of the press is as essential to freedom in general, liberty, then why do we have all these different groups that are... years ago, you'd have press agencies that spent time really diving into an issue and trying to expose, something really nasty that was going on, or deep investigative reporting. That doesn't happen as much anymore. Most of what happens today is, something happened on Facebook, so let's report on that. Or there's a cop chase in Orlando, so we're gonna take the cameras there because everyone wants to know about the cop chase in Orlando. It's what can get the highest ratings right now versus what is most applicable to the liberty of the people.
Well, and I think I've heard it said that freedom of speech is the basic, most important right of all those spelled out in the Bill of Rights, because freedom of religion, self-defense, all of those things flow from freedom of thought, and speech is integrated with thought, so they're one and the same. And so freedom of the press is a super important part of freedom of speech, because they're supposed to be the fourth estate that really keeps the powers that be in check, because
The fourth check.
they have, check and balance, because they have a lot of power in that they're public, the media, and that they can influence public opinion. And that's why you saw around the turn of the 20th century, J.P. Morgan bought up 25 of the most influential newspapers in the country. He put installed editors at all of them, and started paying them a lot more money so that the newspapers of the time would print what was friendly to his agenda. And so we have to realize that, just like anything else in life, media is corruptible. Just like the politicians are, religion, everything can become corrupted. And so media is no different.
Well,
they're humans.
And as well, I mean, you see this, like big newspapers with the advent of internet media, they're constantly stories talking about how newspapers are either going belly up or they're merging with other newspapers, forming bigger and bigger conglomerates because they're not getting the subscribership that they were getting in years past, because people are going to alternative media sources. So they're looking now, revenue-wise, what can we say that's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck? That's going to get us more advertising dollars, not necessarily what is the most important thing to do journalistically. And even sometimes I've heard stories of journalists who were, basically said, no, you can't go down those roads. You can't look for that information because, it doesn't sell papers.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's important to know what the city councilman was doing, at XYZ location with XYZ woman or whatever, but it's not going to sell as many papers as, puppies on Facebook. So let's talk about the puppies on Facebook.
Well, Frank Dodd was this overwhelming reform, so-called, of the financial industry, and it really wasn't. It just helped some people over the others, like they always do. And so if you think about it, the banking industry and the investment industry, they're supposed to be separate. In the fact, they've passed a lot of legislation over the years. But fundamentally, those people can always commingle those industries so that they basically rake the taxpayers over the coal and the general public. So it's the same thing with the media. If we don't have virtue and we don't do things beyond our own self-interest, I'm sounding like a collectivist here, but we have to have fundamental self-interest in following the truth. So no matter how many pieces of legislation come out, unless people are willing to police themselves in a virtuous way and really seek the public good, and that should never be easy, and has never been easy. Because if you're talking about losing sponsors, then I've noticed one thing, Randall. Commercials on mainstream media or even conservative talk radio, as they get more towards what they call the extreme, but more towards fundamental principles. Like, let's say Glenn Beck, for instance. You start to see the sponsors change. Like, you get more food storage companies, more gold and silver, advocates and all of these things. I've noticed that the mainstream media stays away so they can keep the big sponsors. And I think you can have both, but you're definitely not going to make as much money if your goal is the truth.
Right.
You just aren't. And you have to be willing to deal with that. Like us, we've been doing this for 10 years, and we've always stuck to our principles. We've learned and we've grown and changed, but I feel like we really try to go after the truth. And, it is what it is.
Yeah, well, and so that's part of what's maybe compromised, major media outlets or intentionally why they are not functioning that way anymore, because they don't really want people to know the issues in government, the real underlying issues. They don't want to teach principles. They don't want to talk about things they talked about in the 1800s in newspapers, right? They don't want to talk about those fundamental principles that everybody agreed on. They want to talk about things that distract you from it. We'll talk about a headline in Washington, D.C. We'll talk about a headline in a state capital, but we don't really delve into, so he proposed that law. And we said it was bad. Well, why? Is there a principled basis for that? There's no argument like that anymore. It's just, oh, we don't like that because that's going to hurt these people. Well, you know what? Principles hurt too. Principles hurt.
The truth hurts. Kicking against the pricks. We've heard this before. Look, people love Trump because he speaks his mind, right? It means he just will be a jerk.
No filter.
Tweet. And I gotta admit, these late night talk shows that make fun of Trump, sometimes they're quite crude, but there are. I saw one today where they just highlighted how ridiculous some of the things he says is. I mean, ridiculous. I mean, he questioned the Civil War. Like, why did it even happen? Nobody knows. It's like, yeah, people know. But he says things like that. But he will call out the fake media. I wanted to say this earlier. In the election, there was truth to the fact there were fake news sites. And these were really heavy on the conservative side. Because I'd see a story that was, had clickbait title, or it was very interesting. And you go to it, and it would say, the Conservative Daily Report. And you're like, I've never heard of this. So you click through the site, and there's hardly anything there. And you're like, oh, this is just a clickbait site. Then you'd see another one, you click on it, it would be the truth according to conservatives.com. You're like, this is bull crap sites. But I know because there's so many conservatives and political people on Facebook, it is having a real impact. I don't think they'd vote differently either way, but then Trump gets up there and riles people up about fake news. And it's like, look, there's fake news, and then there's news you just disagree with. And I have seen a few reporters trying to do actual news journalism, asking him questions about things he said, and it's just fluff. So essentially, we're getting the same thing from the right that we got from the left when Obama was in office, and it's aggravating to me. It's like you could ask real questions and get real well, maybe not. They don't like to answer real questions.
Well,
if you watch those press conferences with Spicer, they are just mind-numbing. They're like when Obama was in office. They're so ridiculous. Anyway.
Well, but that's the key point. Is now we've gone, okay, the election's over. Obama's had his first, or not Obama, Trump has had his first 100 days. And so we get into this, routine. Now we're in the routine. This is how it's going to go for the next year. And nothing substantially is going to vary from it. We may have one thing here or there that happens, but on the whole, it's just going to be business as usual. That's where we sit. Business as usual in Washington, D.C. Right. And the media likes it that way. They can talk about the next scandal with Anthony Weiner, or they can talk about the next scandal with Representative Boehner.
Weiner's Weiner.
They just, they go on. That's it. That's the thing is the media, when they start talking about fake news, they really went out there about, oh, look at all this fake news that's happening. And it's like, well, wait a second. How much of the crap that the mainstream media talks about is also fake news? Or as Wolf Blitzer would put it, the first revision of history. In other words, we know that what we're saying may not be factual. We're going to say it anyway, though. And
because it sells.
Because it sells. Because we're the first ones with it. And that's what's important, is that we're the first ones. We don't want to fact check. We just want to get it out there. And then when the crap hits the wall, we'll just be like, oh, whatever. We're going on to the next revision of history, and you guys can ponder about why everything we said for the last 15 minutes was a lie.
Well, and let's back up a little bit from just dogging on the media, because you hear these phrases like, if it burns, it earns, if it bleeds, it leads. We humans are somewhat to blame for this, because the negative has so much more power than the happy. Let me suggest this. If you had news on every day and they started out with, so-and-so did a good deed today and did this, it wouldn't seem relevant. Like when it's negative, it affects people's lives, whether it's bad traffic, bad people, bad weather, we pay attention to that. So we kind of have to ease up a little on the media, because that's what impacts our lives.
Okay. Great example of this. What's your favorite Star Wars movie?
My favorite?
Yeah.
None of them.
None of them.
Empire Strikes Back.
Empire Strikes Back. Why? That is by far most people's favorite.
Well,
and a lot of people have related the latest Rogue One movie to Empire Strikes Back. Why do people like those movies? Those two specifically.
Because for me, it would be about rising up against the powers that be. It would be the rebel stories.
But every one of their movies is the rebel story.
Yeah.
Okay? The reason why
I like the characters.
is because the conflict is greater.
Yeah.
Right? You have characters dying in each of those films. Like lots of them. There's great conflict. It doesn't end in a happy resolution. The end of Rogue One, the main character, spoiler alert, dies. Gave you a second there. What, you haven't seen that? Anyway, but I mean, actually, almost every main character
If you've
dies.
seen episode 4, you know the end to Rogue One. I'm just saying.
Yes, it is.
One sentence.
It's episode 4.1. But anyway, but the point is, that's why people resonate with those and they like those, because they added conflict. They left them not with just a happy ending, but it left with a lot of conflict, a lot of angst, and they were more involved in the story, and that's why negative media sells. Because you have someone, hey, on the lighter side today, we just want to tell you that Bill and Tracy's dog had puppies, and they're all super cute. Come on down, take a look. They're selling them for $15.72. No, I mean, people just they hear that and they're like, well, you know what? I don't need to listen to somebody talk about puppies for an hour.
Yeah.
I want to hear the hard-hitting conflict, that I get involved in, and it may affect my life, because if there's something negative, like there was a major earthquake in Oakland. Well, my cousin lives in Oakland, and I need to be worried about them, and so the negative sells because it drives emotion, and we should be a much more positive people.
Well, it's supposed to be the greatest country in the world, and we're the richest of any country probably in history that I know.
Well, and
of.
so maybe that's it, because you go to a third world country. I think a great movie, if you want to get a taste of a third world country, is The Queen of Katwe, which Disney just put out, about this African, Ugandan, can't even read and write, but finds out she's great at chess, and anyway, great inspirational. There's a positive story. Anyway, but it kind of highlights how even with next to nothing, I mean, we're so affluent here in America. Even the poorest of the poor here in America are just so much more affluent than the average individual in some of those African countries, and most of them. And anyway, but they're happy, they're not bound down with all this materialism. They're just happy with what they have, and they realize, so we don't have stuff. Fine, we're just going to be happy with what we have. And so I think part of that, our affluence leads to that negativity, because we're worried about losing. We're worried about, if there is a major earthquake, how's that going to affect me and my stuff and my family? If there is a murderer on the loose, do I need to protect my family? Or if there's a cat burglar in the area, what does that mean about my stuff? It's all in relation to your own little bubble, right? And so I think that kind of plays into the desire for that negative news, because we're worried, and we're worried about how it affects us and our stuff.
Well, think of how flashy news is. Now, just to go back in my history, in 2001, I think, was a pivotal year. That's when I started to watch the news because of 9/11, and I got curious then, and then I graduated to watching Bill O'Reilly on Fox News and listening to Glenn Beck. He used to be a lot more in comedy then. Rush, I think Rush was there, of course. Maybe Hannity a year or two later. And so what I found that Fox News did for me was that there was a lot of flashing banners. This just in, and red and blue.
Breaking news.
And the ticker going across. And what it did is, my wife will tell you, I was always ticked off and angry about something because the show host and because of the whole presentation. I think we single-handedly would not have gone to Iraq without Fox News, because Fox News, I remember that's what I watched, and I was excited for that. It felt like a video game with all those graphics, how could it not, on the screen. And so for me, as I progressed in this journey towards freedom and liberty, I started to get to where I couldn't listen or watch that stuff anymore. In fact, I got to where if I turn on Fox News on TV, like I last 2 to 3 minutes because I see number one is stimulation of the lizard brain or the lizard reflex where it's fight or flight. I see all of that psychedelic color manipulation on me, and I hear all of this support of war, support of foreign policy that I completely disagree with in a Christian and spiritual sort of way. So I just can't do it anymore. So I feel like as we wake up, we go towards other things. And now, as far as Americans, overwhelmingly, they voted for Trump because that marketing worked. Fox News is very influential in the election, I believe. And so I think that's where we're at. We want to be fed all of this philosophy and all of these perspectives, and we just absorb it because it's easy, it's flashy, and it's just, we don't have to do any work. We don't have to read. We don't have to say, what's the principle here? What does the Constitution say about this? What does Randall think? I want to call and debate him. What is this? You know, we don't do that.
Yeah, we get force fed and we take it because we say, well, they're smarter than me. They understand more. They've been doing this longer, right?
Yeah, those hosts like us on the TV, yeah, we study a ton. But the people on TV, they have teams of writers and reporters, and they just read what comes. Now, they might have some influence, but you do a daily thing, unless you're awesome, like us. You're not writing it. You're not writing it. And humble. You're not writing your stuff. You're reading what you're saying. And so that's a huge difference, I think, with mainstream media, so-called. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, but that's totally
true.
There's
no excuse for that.
We're
in the same room. Usually we're cutting each other off because of the delay.
Welcome.
Anyway, I was saying.
but that's so true. You know, you have the media personality, right? You have the guy that's up there on the mic or on the camera. They're the face, they're the voice, or whatever, and they have a team of people that are feeding them information, stories, whatever. They've written whole monologues and whatnot, and in some cases it's the actual artist that's writing it out.
Sure.
Like Ronald Reagan, he would write his longhand, his 5-minute bit that he did daily or weekly or whatever. He would write it out on his own, but most of them, they don't. You know, they have a team, and that's great. They just take what they give them, and most of the times they just read it. And even if they get to something in the middle of it where they're like, I don't know that I agree with this, so like, well, I'm on national news right now on TV, so I'm just going to read what's on the screen because that's what I'm trained to do, and I'm not paid to have an opinion. And then you can't read through it and say, I disagree with the current president about XYZ, and then turn around and say, well, I don't really disagree with him. I lied, because that doesn't come across very good either.
I completely agree with my teleprompter, and I endorse this message 100% to get my paycheck.
That's the funny thing. Barack Obama, teleprompter, he could run a teleprompter like no man's business. And all the criticism that he received, especially from Fox News for being such a teleprompter-ite. Yeah. Almost every one of the people that were talking about how much he used the teleprompter were probably talking about we're reading what was on the teleprompter at that point in time. And yet, you don't think about that because you're watching the news rather than doing the news.
Who do these Pyros think they are? They are such idiots. They don't know anything, and they put forth this persona that they are educated. Oh, sorry, I was just reading the teleprompter and insulting Pyrolitical. No, it's true. It's true. And the thing that was so funny is when Obama would get in his interviews, he would do a lot more, he would talk slower. He'd really have to think. Yeah. Not because he's dumb, but he's trying to think, what can I not say? What should I say? And then he would say the things like, the energy prices would necessarily skyrocket, or, spreading the wealth around is a good thing. Like, he would say his blunders and expose his real political bent because he wasn't scripted at that point.
Yeah, and to think that Barack Obama wrote, he may have wrote one or two of his speeches. I doubt it. He had speech writers. They wrote them for him. This is what happens because, what was it? Lenin said I'm trying to remember the exact quote, but the most indispensable industry was essentially the film industry or the media, because with it you could control all other avenues, all other areas of industry, because you could control popular opinion.
Yep.
Because you could make a movie and maybe it was completely off base, but you could have people leaving the movie with an emotional feel, emotional change in their heart, and it maybe is only a little snippet during the movie or a large part where you had a specific message talking about something that needed to happen or a political agenda or whatever, and all of a sudden, because people listened to it and also left the movie with this great feel in their heart, all of a sudden that's what needs to happen. We need to see that more, and it becomes a major change agent in the world.
Yeah,
so
yeah, it does. Well, and also I think that we as humans need to be very careful, because we are susceptible to manipulation on the feeling level. We always hear that phrase, "That's pathetic." Well, what that is pathetic is from the I believe it's Greek. It's pathos, which means with feeling or to the feeling. Being pathetic used to mean you're doing something with feeling, or you're referring to it, or you're using that. But now we say that's pathetic, and I think the problem with that is we discount feeling in a way that we almost forget that we have feeling and that it can be used. I mean, I think about this, Randall. If I had all the money in the world and I was in office and I was part of the powers that be, I would, number one, I would employ a team of speechwriters and of social scientists that would help me look at focus groups and other media. Like we had that book by Frank Luntz. Frank Luntz is a genius when it comes to coming up with phrases to use with the public. He advises so many presidents and other leaders on what to say and how to say it in an emotional way that... Anyway, so I just think as humans, we need to be really careful with first of all, not reacting negatively or positively to media stories. Anything we put out, you really need to look at it, but not reacting. Like if you hear there's a new terror threat, your first thought should be, that's interesting. Let me do some research on this. Or if you hear that something's in danger to you and your family, say, well, I'm gonna look into this before I even make up any kind of
don't get
judgment.
Emotional about it.
So when the media says this and that, the president's doing a terrible job or a good job, say, okay, let me go look at it and look at his first 100 days. That's been a big thing for... I noticed that all the media, except Fox, they do all the same vein of stories. So anyway, maybe they're all in it together and this back and forth.
You got to have some conflict. Remember, we were talking about that. That conflict... So on one side, you may say, okay, well, Fox News must be out of it because they're not pitching the same crap that everyone else is. But at the end of the day, without that conflict, if everyone was saying exactly the same thing, then we would reject the narrative. So having that other voice that is the opposite side actually helps the mind to decide to accept the message as it comes through, one side or the other. If it was all one way, we wouldn't just naturally as humans. We are skeptical. Well, and so that gives us a way to be skeptical.
We're
and still
skeptical
receive.
Until we accept someone as an authority figure or a trusted news source. That's why they say fair and balanced. When Fox isn't fair and balanced, they're with Trump and the conservatives and the Republicans. That's who they're with. That fair and balanced moniker doesn't do anything but get people to think, no, these guys they know what they're talking about. And honestly, both sides, whether it's sheep crap or it's cow crap, it doesn't matter.
It's still crap.
It's still one big bowl of manure. And so the fact is, but then you run into this other problem, Randall, with media. And then you run into the counter or the extremists, and you've got a credibility and a trust issue from the get-go. Like if I post something on social media as a media guy, I don't have the multi-million-dollar network. So it becomes like people saying, well, who are you? You don't have an inside man.
What does your piece of paper say?
Yeah.
Are you a credentialed pressman?
Well, how do you actually judge someone that's not in the mainstream as a legitimate news source? That's a question. How would you judge
That's a good
them?
question. Well, you can't judge them just based on, I mean, we assume that, say, Bill O'Reilly, he was the big guy, that headliner for Fox News. So individuals would assume that because he had that sort of clout behind him from Fox News, that there was a level of credibility, right? So if you don't have that, then what do you do? Well, like, what's his name? Brian Williams, right?
Yeah.
Here he was the headliner for NBC.
Wasn't he a fighter pilot? Just kidding.
Anyway, but then finally something came out. Both those guys, right? Something came out, and all of a sudden they're discredited.
Well, 50 things came out about Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah. Anyway,
50 women.
But the point is that because that media engine is promoting that, and you tend to try and believe the narrative because it's got so much money behind it and experience and years and years, that it becomes like, okay, well, it's Brian Williams, so
and Flash.
It's NBC or it's Fox News, so we're going to go with that. But when it comes to an independent individual, you don't have that same layer of like automatic credibility. So I think people generally would look at an individual or a small media outlet with more skepticism. Which is great because that allows you to vet their information and not just assume, oh, well, because they said it must be true. That's what this nation needs, is more people, more skeptics, more people who are willing to look at an issue and try and reason out the truth of it. What's the principle here? Not what did they say? Okay, well, let's go do it. Let's march on the Capitol because Randy and Thomas said let's go and do it. No, that's not the case.
Someday.
You'd love that, but no.
Someday.
The people need to be able to reason out and say, you know what? I agree with what they said. I understand what they said because of X, Y, Z. These principles hold true. They're timeless. Therefore, I agree with that. But we assume so much as citizens of the U.S. in today's day and age. I mean, we used to sit around the fire with the newspaper, the local newspaper, right? And we would talk about it. We would, if there was a crap article, we would try and figure it out. We'd be like, no, I don't agree with that. You didn't just take it as read. Like that's what it is. You would go and you would discuss it amongst your family, amongst your neighbors. It would be the topic of discussion, and then you'd reason it out amongst yourselves. We don't do that anymore. Our talking amongst ourselves is going on Facebook and saying, well, I think this is what happened. I think the president should do this. And then the next thing you know, somebody's climbing into your conversation saying, I think you're a jerk, blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, oh, no, jerk, you're a bigger jerk, and that's what the conversation goes to. Instead of people actually carrying on a meaningful conversation about a topic which leads to something positive. It's the conflict again.
Well, I wouldn't mind being called a fascist because that actually takes a little knowledge of governmental systems to be called a fascist. So
no, it doesn't. It
does too.
Because people don't see.
Usually I just see idiot or moron or swear words. I don't see...
The funny thing is that you used to have, here you have the fascists, the Nazis, and the communists, the Russians, who were diametrically opposed, so people think they were on the right and the left.
Well, they were enemies.
They were enemies, but not because their ideas were that different. The only difference was the fascists wanted the government to tell private companies what to do, and the communists just wanted to take over the private companies. But in the end, what they wanted was totalitarian control of the marketplace.
Well, that was something I posted on today, taking it back to the media. Someone said, why were the communists more popular than the Nazis? Because everybody hates the Nazis, right? And I said, well, the communists have better marketing. They talk about the working man, and it wasn't like a racial superiority like with the Nazis. It was, we're going to unite for the proletariat, and we're going to bring about a world where everything is equal pay,
Yay.
equal outcomes, which failed horrendously. In fact, communists have killed far more people than socialists, national socialists or Nazis did. And so it's kind of ironic, but okay, here, let's go back to this.
Well, I wanted to finish one thing there, because they talk about the Nazis being on the right and the communists being on the far left.
Yep.
and like it's this this line, this continuum, right? And so we have the Nazis way over,
You see
Nazis
that
over
all
here,
the time.
and you have the fascists over here, and you have the communists over here. But it's not a line like that, because you have liberty it's a circle, and you have liberty at the top, and you have dictatorship at the bottom. And so the communists and the Nazis were both down here at the bottom. They wanted the same thing. They had most of the same ideology, which was essentially dictatorship, and they were both all the way away. And they get the right and the left for those things because the houses of parliament in Europe, the Nazis would sit on the right side of it, and the communists would sit on the left side. And so anyway, there's this huge misunderstanding of right versus left in that discussion, because ultimately it's all about control.
Yeah.
Do we have liberty or do we have tyranny? Communists and Nazis were both tyrannical.
There's your spectrum. And a lot of things they have in common, socialism and communism or Nazism, is that all the leaders live in mansions. All the people are in a subclass by
Placated.
that point. And and they're placated with bread and circuses or mugs, whatever. There was this story about King Alexander or Nicholas, the Tsar Nicholas, the last Tsar of Russia. He gave out these free mugs with gold in them, like they had gold in the whatever. Anyway, people got killed because they stampeded. But that's what happens in these collectivist utopias, we'll call them.
Dystopias.
But let's go back. Let's talk about the media then and how this connects. I made a claim earlier that one side's sheep crap and the other side's cow crap, and none of it's good. How are you going to find out the truth about that? If that's 90% of what you can consume, how do you find out the truth of anything we say or of any other media outlet?
Okay, I'm going to take your crap a little further, because you get your cow crap and your sheep crap or whatever,
You need her boots.
and it's no good right out of the animal, right? It's just a mess.
Don't
It's just
take it
mess,
any
stinky
further.
mess. No, but you take that,
This analogy.
you take that and you let it sit, and then you put it in your garden, and all of a sudden you can grow some amazing things from it. But it takes time, and we're too busy. We're too busy on a daily basis. We're jumping from this thing, one thing to the other. We don't take time to really ponder about what's been said and kind of link it all together. But that's what happens in nature. We take time with that manure, and it becomes food for a new growth of plants, right?
Okay,
But
I'm
when
still with you.
But when it first comes out, it's just garbage. Just assume that everything that the media spews at you every day is garbage. Take it in, but don't act on it. Just ponder about it, and maybe in 6 months or a year or whatnot, you'll be like, okay, I understand. There's been enough context here that I now know that what they were saying was either completely false or it was partially true, because all these other things have come out into the open. That first revision has gone on, and now you have the second, third, and fourth revision. And anyway, that manure can become fruitful, plentiful.
Randall, you're doing a good job with this analogy I started.
Where are we going? Where are we going with the poop?
It stinks, but it's just a sweet stink. No, I was going to share this thing I posted online the other day, and it's perfect for what we're discussing here. There's a picture of all these leaders, and it lists. It's right here at the top, I promise. Right there.
Okay.
So George Orwell.
You're gonna show the people here.
George Orwell said, "The war is not meant to be won; it is meant to be continuous." So there's Lyndon B. Johnson with Vietnam, Nixon with Laos and Cambodia,
Truman in
Korea, Reagan with Beirut and Grenada, George Bush Sr., Panama, Iraq, and Somalia, Bosnia and Kosovo with Clinton, Afghanistan and Iraq with Bush Jr., Libya, Somalia, and Yemen with Obama. Now, Trump had a question mark over him. I put Syria on top of him because I thought, well, that's a military action he's taken that was completely unnecessary. But think about that. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 different countries in the last 50 years that Americans have, to the tune of billions of dollars, maybe even trillions. Actually, we spent $2 trillion in Iraq already. Trillions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of lives, there was 50,000 alone in Korea and in Vietnam. But because the media is so effective, and the government was able to use it to get Americans so afraid, we've literally lost hundreds of thousands of lives and trillions of dollars in treasure in our system or in our country. And so that's why we as Pyrolitical, if we're telling you something, likely it's not going to lead to your death. If we're advocating for not going to war here or for cutting spending, we're actually trying to make the republic better, you freer, and to keep more of your treasure. So when you're engaging and analyzing and judging media outlets, are they actually trying to make us freer or not? Now, Fox News will say, yes, we are, by bombing the world. Well, you got to say, well, hey, there's a cost and a consequence to that. Well, you might say, well, then terrorists will get us. Then you start to look at, well, where did the terrorists come from? How do they exist? Then you get into some interesting topics, and you start to learn some very disconcerting and uncomfortable truths about the history of the United States of America. What are you doing, Randall?
I'm just bringing the image so they can actually see it, because you were, kind of moving it around there. So
was I?
Here we go. There we go, people.
Look at this image.
There's the image that he's talking about, so you can see the whole thing while he's talking about it.
I just need to calm down. I can't. We're talking about truth. Gets me excited. So that's basically an important thing, is that when there is media messaging, what is it trying to get you to do? Not what is it trying to teach me, but what is the fruit that it will bear if I believe it, or will I send my son to war? Will I allow the government to continue to raise the debt ceiling because they're telling me to be afraid of a government shutdown? Am I allowing the federal government to take over vast millions and millions of acres because I believe in national parks? I mean, there's so many consequences to all of these policies. And so when the media sends you a message, say, I'll get back to you. Randall, you said that beautifully earlier.
Oh,
we'll get back to you. We're going to find out. What?
Heck yeah. No, I agree.
You tried to multitask.
Of course. I am. I mean, we were just talking about how we don't have enough time, right? Because we're always multitasking. We're doing all these different things. Everyone is every day. We've been working so hard at work that we get home and we just want to veg or whatever. And so we want to be spoon-fed. We want to just receive the little bit, and we don't want to have to think too much. And
well, think of how many media messages. If you drive to work and listen to the radio, you get news reports at the bottom and the top of the hour. You get some different personality. Maybe you get two shows because it overlaps the top of the hour. Then you drive home from work and you hear more of that stuff. Then you get to your home and maybe you watch the TV news at night, or you get on your smartphone. Maybe you got a news feed on your phone. I mean, you literally can be exposed to 20 to 30 stories a day easily. What do you do with all that?
Garbage.
Poop. Going back to
the analogy. Let's keep it going.
How do you turn that manure into useful, nutritious food for your life's garden? Oh, yeah. That was so bad. Sorry,
that was bad.
I've got a sinus thing going, and I'm trying to keep the whistler wet.
No, but that's totally true. How do you take all this garbage that's out there and turn it into something useful? I mean, the world is always, or in the world today, we're talking about different ways: green energy, green this, green that, recycle and compost and whatever. And so we're always looking at ways of taking all this trash and trying to make it into something better, right? Well, but nobody's really doing that with the media, because that same issue is all over the place. But environmentalists want to make it be like, well, the big issue is the world around us. We've got to protect that. Well, you know what? We can have, the world around us may take generations to really get bad. So we do need to do something about that. But we can have a news story that can change and affect things in a day or a week or a year. Just that change, where we could lose freedoms. We could have popular opinion change in such a way that they don't realize that they're giving up their freedoms. Perfect example. 17th Amendment. I mean, I never talk about the 17th Amendment.
It's in the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, so here we have an amendment that when it was sent out, people were talking about corruption.
Can you lower this mic a little bit? It is like I'm like dodging it. I'm just having a hard time with it.
Okay.
Oh.
Anyway, so
Hello there. I can see my face.
anyway, so
It's messing with
so
my
they
peripheral.
so at the time there were like 1 or 2 corruption cases. I mean, very minimal. That came out for whatever reason, and so they said, well, you know what we got to do? The reason is because they're not accountable to the people, and so we need you to have your voice and vote. So we've got to have the 17th Amendment. We got to rewrite this Constitution, because the founders obviously didn't know what they were talking about. They didn't understand what was going on. I mean, the Senate was meant to be this place where legislation came and maybe never left.
Things went to die.
Exactly.
Bills went to
Because
die.
because when bills don't get passed, your liberty is not infringed.
Yeah.
Okay? 99% of the time, bills that go through Washington, D.C. do not make your life any better. They reduce your quality of life because they infringe upon your liberty. Anyway, so the people got all excited. Yeah, let's do that.
I get another vote.
Same year, 16th Amendment, income tax.
The feds can
soak
tax
the
me?
rich. Soak the rich. It's only a 7% tax on the wealthiest, 3% of people. You know, let's do it. That only lasted 1, 2, 3 years, and all of a sudden the income tax became a thing for everybody.
Because we went to war. World War I, it was necessary to have the income tax to pay for war. And even the founders said that's the only time you should have income tax. I can't say the word.
Well,
Exigence.
but
Situation.
But they knew they couldn't get the income tax to really do what they needed it to without the 17th Amendment also being passed, because the senators, they were looking out for their state. You know, so in proxy, they were looking out for your interests because they were looking out for the state's interests. And I mean, I like to use this analogy. Who has more power? The individual, let's say here in Utah, that votes for Orrin Hatch and then calls his office and he's like, oh, you're one of, several million people that voted in my state. Great.
Thank you for
Thanks.
sharing your opinion.
Yeah, goodbye.
Thanks for participating in our democracy.
Delete that email.
I'll send him a form letter.
Or prior to the 17th Amendment, when they would come in and say, you know what? I'm one of 104 legislators at the state capitol that put you in office. You're going to listen to me, and you bet they would. A story, I've shared this many times, where an individual, our state representatives went back to Washington, D.C. to meet with Orrin Hatch, and they had set up a time. They flew in to go visit with him. They got there, and he's like, okay, well, you got 5 minutes because I got someone else coming in. And he literally listened to him to 5 minutes and ushered him out the door, and they had some delegation from Israel that came in. And I'm like, okay, here he's supposed to represent Utah,
Yep.
but he's this international figure. He's not beholden to the state. He's not even beholden to you as voters because he don't care, right? He's got the media he can use.
He doesn't have to care.
And he can have his money to get back in office because you think he's a good guy. Anyway, the point is that the media was used to help people give away their power in Washington, D.C. by passing the 17th Amendment. The media was used to have the people decide they wanted to soak the rich and pass the 16th Amendment at the same year,
Yep.
virtually the same time. And anyway, so the media becomes this very profound vehicle for changing opinion, for making change in the world. And especially when we just listen and we're like, oh yeah, let's do that. That sounds great.
I got a story for you.
Healthcare? That sounds great. We can have healthcare. I mean, I haven't been able to qualify for healthcare because of XYZ reason. That sounds awesome. Wait a second. Maybe I should think about it for a minute and decide, oh, you know what? If I thought about it for 3 minutes, I'd realize that not only would it be awesome, but it's also going to kill all of my kids. Every kid dead. Okay? There you go. End of story.
You're freaking us all out, Randall. You got a lot of kids to kill off.
Well, we're eating our kids' future.
We are consuming it through a giant socialized straw.
And we don't think cannibalism is a good thing, but yet we'll do it. As long as it's only, proverbial.
Well, let me
so to
share.
speak.
Let me share this story, which is not proverbial. This happened in Utah. Now, this is very Utah-centric and specifically religion-centric, but I got to explain this to you because it was amazing. Back in the 30s, when the New Deal was coming about, everybody loved FDR in his first term or two, and then they hated him by the end of the four, and they made a new amendment to the Constitution, so you couldn't serve 4 terms anymore. Anyway, so you have the Mormons, and they're like, at the time, I think 80% or more of the populace. FDR's proposing this New Deal. Now, the Mormons view the head of the church as a prophet of God like Moses or any of them. I mean, what he says is, thus saith the Lord. He represents the Lord to the followers in the church. Well, Randall, I found that the president and his 2 counselors sent a letter to the president of the United States encouraging him not to follow this course of action, and they made it very well known to the members of the church that they did not want them to support the New Deal. Well, guess what? In the election, someone that the leader who's a prophet, they said don't support this program, and this was his big program. Utah re-elect this president, and overwhelmingly by over 60%, when their own prophet had said, don't support his major program. Here's why. It's
going to undermine our society.
Yeah. So the power of the media in that, and of TV back then, and of just that.
Radio.
Did they have TV?
No. That didn't come until later.
They do have some recordings. But the power of the media then was powerful enough to get the members of a church which believe they have a prophet at the head to kind of go against what the prophet said and follow the president, which would be a false prophet.
Because it was political expediency, and you know, we start talking about
that
this
was a
because
little weird story to share.
No, it affected their pocketbook, and that was a big deal for them. And so that's why they went the other way. But
and everyone was scared. We get that.
Yeah, we understand that. But the point is that's exactly why Hitler gained power. There's this great book. They thought they were free. I highly encourage you, if you can find a copy on eBay or whatnot, go get it. I think it's out of print completely. But it's basically this conversation that this guy, the author, has with all these different Germans that in the 50s that had lived through World War II. And he just asked them questions. He's like, so why did you choose to do this? Why did this happen? And at the end, it came down to money. It came down to the fact that if you had a job with the government, it was seen as being guaranteed you were going to have money, and it was your family would be fine, and so then once you had a job in there, then you weren't going to go against them. So even if something crazy came out of Washington D.C., same thing, right? If we're dependent on, this is where I'm going, okay? Is if we're dependent on government programs for our prosperity, then when the government says we need to do this, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to do this because I don't want to lose that, which is exactly why the state has a hard time doing any of those hard things, making hard decisions for the liberty and independence of the citizens of the state, because they're beholden to the federal government for so much of the funding that goes on to fund schools and other programs, Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare and all these programs. We get all these federal funds to make those happen.
Which is kind of a misnomer, because either the federal funds are inflated, issued currency from the feds, or it's our tax dollars. So, well, just one thing. I did look on audible.com to see if they thought they were free was available. It's not. So you'll have to find a different source, like you said, eBay. But maybe
we should make our own audiobook of it.
That would be awesome.
It's the long one.
Wait, should we do that?
I don't know. Okay.
Okay, sorry, mini meeting. But Randall, I think you make a really good point that the government knows one basic thing about us. We are worker bees who care about our kids, our spouses, and survival. So if they're consuming massive tax dollars, or they want to corrupt the currency through inflation, what they need to do is they need to market and mold and propagandize us in a way that gets us in fear about our jobs. I mean, think about this. The government gets involved in our welfare, gets involved in our retirement, gets involved in our children's education, gets involved in our food, gets involved in, of course, war, and all of the things that we need as humans to survive and to thrive. Government is in there with strict regulations, taxation, and a marketing machine in the media to keep us in constant fear. So I noticed, Randall, when I changed my philosophy and I stopped fearing what was out there, even if government said, I stopped watching the Fox News. In fact, I started to read. Freaky. I started going to books and learning timeless principles, and I learned that, hey, the human race has been around for thousands of years, and they've grappled with these issues forever.
Well, and so here you have, in the last couple minutes we've got here, I think here we have the answer, right? For individuals, is books. Books, and not just books today, but books, timeless books that have these principles, because newspapers and television media, news outlets, they're concerned about today, right? They're concerned about their welfare today rather than your welfare today. They're concerned about making sure that they make their bottom dollar today. Whereas books, you may have someone that releases a book today and they're concerned about that as well, but it's not the same motivation isn't there, because it's not about selling, getting the viewership today or selling a number of books today. There's a bigger investment, and you can take that home and you can kind of digest it, and you can, cross-reference and look at different things. But even going back to those books that are older and older, I mean, 1850s, Frederick Bastiat, that's the primer. Frederick Bastiat's The Law. You take that and you read that, and then you use that as your primer to compare everything else that you read, because he gives you principles in that book, which we lack today. Most books don't do that.
We do.
Or most media doesn't do that.
Well, and there's lots of good philosophers like Jung, Kant. Those are some good ones. Locke. Like you said, Bastiat. There's Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, the famous ones. I mean, there's so many. Newton. There's some in our day. Like, I like Stefan Molyneux a lot. He's not, I think he's an atheist, but he's really good. He's out of Canada. I've been listening to a new guy whose name slips me, but he talks a lot about gender and how gender roles have been corrupted. But let's go back as we finish up with media. And once again, I believe God wants his children to be moving towards truth at all times. In fact, I think he hates it when our agency is violated and we're manipulated. I think he said it's better to be drowned than to offend his little ones. We're all little ones. No matter what level of education we think we've ascended to, the wisdom of men is foolishness of God. We don't see very much at all. So the fact is, I think God hates it when people purposely distract and pervert the truth for people that are depending on it. So I believe, number one, that God and the Spirit will guide you in your search for truth. Number two, the more you seek, the more you'll find. And the more you learn that you don't know, the more you'll learn, or the more you will know. And those things are really important. And then last of all, what is Pyrolitical teaching us? Are they leading us towards greater freedom and agency and accountability and self-reliance? Or are they taking us from it? All the media outlets, what are they trying to get you to do and to be? You've got to ask yourself that. So anything we've said tonight, I don't know, pray about it, research it, find contradictions.
Write comments below and on YouTube. Hey. We want to hear what you have to say.
Send us money if we're right. Whatever you feel. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Vote with your dollars. Vote with your dollars. There you go.
Yeah. Is capitalism evil? Is it good? Socialism? All those things. I mean, the Lord wants you to understand what the truth is, and he'll guide you in that pursuit. And then people that are tied to a higher power that's external, outside the power structures of this world, they're powerful. They get to the point where the government can't do anything but take them out and try to shut them down, because when you mix your message with theology and with spirituality and principles, you're unstoppable.
That's right. That's right. And here we are.
Actually, we have to stop.
We do have to stop, even though we're unstoppable. Thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you here listening and watching us on YouTube, Pyrolitical Live. We're grateful for you, and I hope you've learned something tonight. And tell your friends. Subscribe.